This is what you want. This is what you get. This is what you get.
You have located GeekFest Rants, the entertainment podcast for genre geeks like you.
Shall we play a game?
Covering the world of vintage and current film and television since 2010.
Game over, man. It's game over.
Featuring in-depth conversations on sci-fi, horror, fantasy, comics, toys, and conventions.
So say we all. So say we all.
And now sit back, relax, and enjoy today's show.
Spawn, your former self, meaning one hell-bent for leather kick-ass, take no prisoners government assassin by the name of Al Simmons is dead.
When I let my guard down, all the ghosts come back to me.
Cut a deal for your soul, Hellspawn.
So get used to it.
As far as I know, I'm already dead, which means I'm waiting for your sorry ass in the afterlife.
You're not like the other Hellspawns. There is something good inside you.
I used to be a man.
What you do in the dark will be brought to the light.
If you don't have the stomach for it, get the hell out of here.
Yeah. What a comedian.
I want my humanity back.
Welcome to hell.
Hi, everybody, and welcome once again to GeekFest Rants. My name is Carlos Perone, and joining me today, I'm going to have Steve Folks. He will be with us to discuss McFarlane Toys, a line of toys that, for us, was very popular in the 90s, mostly. The line still exists today, but we are going to try to examine how we got hooked on those particular toys. What were our favorite, acquisitions or lines from McFarlane, and the unusual, different kind of look that this particular action figure line brought us with its very, shall we say, colorful creator, Todd McFarlane. So let's get started with McFarlane action figures.
You can collect them all.
Batteries not included.
Get those wonderful toys.
Details on specially marked packages at participating stores.
Is that the $6 Million Man's boss? It's Oscar Goldman. Why do you have that? That's worth a lot of money. That's much more valuable than Steve Austin.
Action figures each sold separately.
Hi, I'm Chucky, and I'm your friend to the end.
Some assembly required.
All your favorite Star Wars heroes and villains. I have 3 of each. 1 to display, 1 to open, and 1 just in case.
All right, I'm here with Steve, and today we are going to be talking about McFarlane action figures. This is a line that, as far as I'm concerned, changed the entire industry. When we were at one point used to a certain size and a certain amount of detail, this changed everything. And it's funny because nowadays, whenever I talk about a certain style, like if I say 3 3/4, I'm thinking Star Wars. But when I think about the next evolution in action figures, I call them McFarlanes, even if they're not McFarlanes. And there's a million other brands, but to me, they're just McFarlanes because that's the brand of how they changed. What about you? What do you remember of those when they first came out?
Yeah, well, when they first came out, I was pretty young. But when I first started noticing the difference between the regular action figures and, as you say, the McFarlanes was definitely because of Spawn, which is the flagship of what McFarlane was pushing for. So once I saw that, and just the Spawn concept, and just the way he looked himself was so unique and different.
But were you following the comic, or were you? Because my only reference to Spawn that I have was the old HBO series based on his animated series that came directly from him, and that kind of tuned me into a little bit to that movie that they made, and then there were figures also made based on some of that stuff.
Yeah, well, how I came about, and I think if you I started out loving comics, so I think if you're of like a certain age, if you're like a preteen boy trying to get into comics, you had to have looked at Spawn at one point in your life and said, this looks so cool. So this is what really sort of got me into Spawn. Like I think it must have been a little before the movie came out, and the Spawn movie was 97. So I was very young, and I remember being introduced to Spawn, and surprisingly, my mother was like, not only was she like okay with it, she liked the look of like Spawn, so I had no problems, because a lot of times, if you get like maybe a very religious family, Spawn has a pretty devilish connotation. But
that and Harry Potter.
Yeah. Not exactly two things you want your, Christian child to be reading. Perhaps
Dungeons and Dragons, Harry Potter, and Spawn.
There, yeah. But I got into the Spawn comics, and I was and he makes no qualms about advertising his own stuff. So embedded in the advertising is Spawn figures everywhere and McFarlane toys. So if you're reading the Spawn comics, for a fact what toys are coming out and everything. So that's how I was really introduced to it. And once I saw a lot of the figures and how different they were, I really started going after them and started looking at them more closely than some of the other 3 3/4 and some of the other smaller Hasbro and Mattel type toys. Well,
let's talk a little bit about the difference. In other words, again, to me, you have your old Kenner 3 3/4 styles, which are, I absolutely love them, and I'm very nostalgic, and I'm still collecting them.
They're great,
and we've seen these new lines that try to imitate that, like the retro lines and the reaction line, and there's like 2 or 3 companies that are specializing nowadays in recreating that old Kenner style. Yep. Then after Kenner, you kind of had Hasbro continuing with that size, but much more detailed. So that's when they started redoing all the Star Wars from scratch and beyond everything that was never made in Kenner. But then the next step to me is these McFarlanes that, number one, much bigger, way bigger. Yeah. The detail is ridiculous. It almost seems to me like he was trying to recreate the statue market in terms of the super insane detail that they would do on statues. On non-posable statues, he seems to wanted to recreate that into something kids can actually pose and play with. And yes, they did cost obviously a little more than your action figure size, but you got way, way, way more for your money. A bigger, more posable, a lot of articulation, a lot of accessories. Yeah. So it was completely a brand new thing as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and just to give a bit of the backstory of how we got to how McFarlane wanted to get into the toy business was you had to sort of, I don't know how much you want to take to this, because this is coming from his a few interviews we've seen over the years. So you I don't know how much you want to take to this stuff actually happen or not. Maybe.
Well, we have to remember that he is a character. The guy. He's a super self-promoter.
Yeah.
He's
a businessman first over
right, and he's kind of rough around the edges. He's not refined, if you will. He's kind of like in your face. It's when you hear interviews, you almost feel like there's a good chance that at any second he's gonna get into a fight with somebody.
Yeah. That's exactly how. Like he's. I wouldn't really want to be around this guy drinking a beer or two, or I'll just say that. But
working for him.
Yeah, really. But he describes, seeing a lot of the action figures in the toy aisles, he would frequent, and he remarked that that all of them followed a sort of status quo cookie cutter sort of mold. Like no pun intended. Like a sort of
right.
Sort of they all had the same sort of stiff arms at the sides, or they come from maybe a few accessories, but none of them were really detailed, and none of them had any sort of dynamic posing to them or anything, and they didn't look like they were, they could, be in a panel of a comic book or anything, or
that's the main thing. It's comic books, because that's where he's coming from, and he's recreating like these cover poses that you never are able to do with 3 3/4.
Yeah, exactly. And at this time, other companies have already come to him, because he's already, when Spawn has already made a name for itself, and Spawn did land with a big splash. So a lot of these companies like Mattel and Hasbro were coming to him saying, okay, we want to do a licensing deal with, for your Spawn character, but they all wanted him to follow. And this is like the sort of trademark of McFarlane, where they wanted him to follow a certain way and certain aesthetic that they had. And McFarlane didn't want to do that. He wanted to make his characters in his own unique style, and what he wanted to do would have cost Mattel or whoever was coming at him with it would have been too much money, and it would have had to they would have had to go to great lengths to create these poses and what he wanted, what he envisioned. So like how he broke off with Marvel and DC to create Spawn, he basically said, okay, I have my own company at this point, which is Image Comics. Let's see if we can sort of take it upon ourselves, go out to these other properties and start getting licenses from them directly. So we started seeing a lot of movies, and especially from his own comic book properties, that he acquired the licenses to a few of these things, and he started making these toys based on them. And the first obviously were his own Spawn figures that he started producing. And they were, and what's funny is a lot of people accuse him of writing Spawn characters in the books just for the purpose of selling action figures later, because you would see in the comics like these wacky, crazy, really unique looking villains, but they would appear like once and you would never see them again, and they would have like no real ties to them, and like Spawn would like tangle with them for a bit and then they would just disappear, but then suddenly you have a figure of them hanging on the shelves, I
don't know where. Well, it's funny because that's what Lucas got accused of that by the time Return of the Jedi was coming out. One of the reasons why they, some interviews say that Gary Kurtz kind of split off from George Lucas was because at this point, Lucas was just making up characters just for the toy purposes. So in other words, Kenner was telling him, hey, we need more of this. So he was just creating characters because the toy was just, the money coming from the toys was just too tempting. That's if you want to believe that story or not. But I have a feeling there's some truth to that.
I'm sure there is.
Ewoks are so cute. With kids will buy them. That kind of stuff.
What's funny is I don't think George Lucas would be that forthcoming about saying and admitting this. With
No.
McFarlane has no qualms about. McFarlane has no qualms about saying, because in fact one of the interviews was they were telling about the foundation of why he wanted to get into toys, and he unabashedly says, because in the early 90s comics were doing very well. It was just, it definitely wasn't a golden age, but comics were definitely picking up. But by the mid 90s, going toward that time frame, it was definitely taking a hit and slowing down drastically. So he said he wanted to not put all of his eggs in one basket, into the comic book industry, and because he said, if that tanks, which it did, he would be wiped out. So so that's why you see him throw Spawn into the movies, throw the animated series, now he has this entire toy line coming out, and he wants to sort of diversify his properties into as many platforms as possible. And that's how I guess that's really what inspired him to take the reins of making McFarlane toys. Which is smart, but it's maybe a bit greedy, but smart.
And I mean there is a downside to having so much product out that a good percentage of it will just fail, and some people might all of a sudden start buying something, and then 6 months later, that's it, the line is closed, and then you're like, oh shoot, no more whatever it is that you're collecting. With me, again, that HBO series was something that I really, really enjoyed, and it had, like you said, there was this aura of like adult entertainment associated with at least the Spawn character. Again, I'm not so sure so much about the comic book because I wasn't a comic book person, but the show, because it was HBO, and I think it was only at night because it was very adult.
Yep.
The things that were happening in animation were very like, oh my god, I didn't know they did this. It was almost like anime kind of sexual situations, violence, language, that kind of very hard R-rated kind of stuff. So it did have this weird aura around it that I don't think ended up carrying into the movie as well as the animated show did. I think the animated show, again, I'm not the expert at this, but I think the animated show was more true to what maybe they were trying to hit than what ended up in that movie.
100%. And it's, the Spawn animated series is very close to what, at least from what I remember. I might be remembering this incorrectly because I haven't rewatched it, but the Aeon Flux cartoon. I don't know if you remember. The Aeon Flux cartoon was very similar, and I remember seeing both of them when I was very young. And I remember seeing them. I really liked them. I really liked looking, but I remember leaving just like a bad taste in my mouth in a good way. but when I saw the live action movie in '97, it just didn't work. I mean, even back then, I liked it. Yeah, I thought it was cool, but it just even back then I was thinking like this isn't really the same character to me. It was more goofy, sort of that 90s comic book type of humor. Right.
This is before the X-Men films. Before that second renaissance of comic book movies. But yeah, it kind of went away fast. But even up to today, I think he's still pitching the rights to be able to do it again. I think he's planning on it. I think he's working on doing it again.
The company Blumhouse, I think they offered him they offered him some sort of deal where they're going to, I guess, finance like a first draft of a script or something. Ever since the first Spawn movie, I think he's been like sort of like chomping at the bit to try it again, basically, and because he has a very unique vision where he wants to now have more control, because I think in the 97 movie, it was more in the studio's hands that they wanted to dictate how it would look. But, Spawn, knowing McFarlane now, I think he now wants to have more of a heavier hand in it. But to get back to the toys, some of the earlier sets of the McFarlane line were, basically his own property. It was more like the actual, from the comics and the actual Spawn figures themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But, and like you were saying, like, even looking at them on the store shelves, they were so drastically different looking. Even just the plastic, I guess, not box, but
the packaging.
The packaging, the blister, I guess. It was
huge.
It was these big, chunky things compared to the smaller, regular size figures. So even then, it just looked so more imposing. And if you look at them, even his earlier figures were just so much more dynamic, and they had a very comic book feel to them. So
now, was he into sports stuff that earlier on, or did that come later?
I think it came later, but I think that was one of the first two things. It was a few random movies. Like I remember he got like Austin Powers, I think, or Night for Christmas.
I have some of those.
He got a few sort of I guess he was sort of trying to get as many studios as possible to sort of get his legs off the ground. But yeah, the sports, I believe it was baseball. I think it was the MLB were licensing, where he started getting into like a lot of the baseball figures and everything.
Well, some of those movie ones also, like you said, the Austin Powers, and even I think I also have Napoleon Dynamite. They actually came with a little talking feature where you press a button on a separate device and they'll say some of those lines, the catchphrases and stuff like that. I remember. I have those,
Yeah, and I also remember Kiss. There was a Kiss line of figures.
Oh,
where he really made, because, the Kiss, the band members, they all had, their own personalities, but,
Talk about another self-promoting entity.
I would have loved to see the business meeting between those two. Discussing the licensing would have been great. He even had like an early version of them, and he gave them very exaggerated, even more so exaggerated costumes, and like made their guitars look like weapons, and so a lot of the stuff was. It was established stuff. It was established, licenses and established products, but just given like this very unique Todd McFarlane flair. And so there was a lot of the stuff he take from his own properties, like the basic Spawn figure, but then give it sort of maybe like a more medieval look or something, or another set being more of like a Viking. Like he has a great Viking series where it's like all of the Spawn cast basically all in like more of like a Viking look to them and everything, and very Norse. So there was a whole bunch of different waves like this. Like there would be just unique takes on like Space Marines and different characters, and he would just give them these really unique different looks to them.
Now, what I absolutely loved, and what the biggest collection I have of McFarlane stuff is the movie Maniacs. And
yes.
I remember it came in waves.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember there were also like copyright issues sometimes, because like if you couldn't get like a certain character, he would get like the sequel version of that character. So for example, like Escape from New York, he couldn't, I think the rights were too expensive or something, so he got Escape from LA. So he's dressed a little different, but technically it's the same character. Right. But you're like, oh man, I wish he would have gotten it.
I remember the earliest figures I have of McFarlane. I remember buying them was I think the X-Files, and I remember because my sister.
Oh yeah, I still have those.
Yeah. My sister and I, my sister got Scully, and I got I was about to say David Mulder. Yeah, and I think it was from the movie or maybe from the
movie.
Was it? Okay, yeah. Then,
but they did create some television characters. I remember some of their biggest monsters.
Oh, really?
They were still because I have a whole bunch of those. Yeah,
the only ones I remember seeing,
like the Fluke Man. I remember I have the Fluke Man.
Oh, really?
And stuff like that.
The only ones we got were we had Mulder and Scully, and I think they came with like two like bodies and two like I guess Scully came
like corpses.
Yeah, Scully came like a corpse
in like an ambulance gurney or something, and as like a special thing. And there was like a caveman from the movie and a couple of weird looking alien creatures. Yeah, I got a whole bunch of those. Yeah.
And so I think I like retroactively found out that was a McFarlane toy. I don't think going into I knew that was McFarlane. But he also created a whole bunch of like more fantasy based, and like you were saying, like the whole movie Maniacs, where he would take like he would take like the creatures from the movies and everything, and sort of give them their own like his own again type of McFarlane flair to it, where it's more like grotesque, bigger,
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of like
I got the Sleepy Hollow ones, the one that came with the horse and the background and the rider on top. Oh my God, they're so perfect for Halloween. I was telling you earlier that's one thing I've gotten to do over the last 2 years is because I don't have any more room to display that in my office anymore, because so much Star Wars everywhere.
I know that feeling.
Halloween, I bring all my monsters out in Halloween, and I do this entire display like near my kitchen living room area, so I can kind of get that's the only time I can get away with bringing so many toys to outside the office. But hey, I'll do it. If I can get away with it.
I know the feeling. Right now, I'm trying, and actually, just to let our audience know, you're sort of the reason why I want to do this deep dive into McFarlane, because Carlos was generous enough to send me one of the McFarlane toys where it's the bike of Akira or Kaneda really from the movie Akira. And it's a McFarlane, and I was hunting for that thing for so long, and when he finally sent it to me, I went on like this McFarlane craze to try to find more stuff, which I'm still in the process of now going back and trying to find some of the older figures.
But they were like all over the place. Like I remember they had Texas Chainsaw Massacre. They had the Thing. Yep. They had some. I mean, you name it, and he made it. He just jumps from line to line.
Yeah, and it was great because he started out with like only like a handful of licenses, but because his quality was so great and it was so different, unique looking, soon people were coming to him to make their toys. And I remember he was also later on. I probably like early 2000s, there was a Beatles line where it was like a set the Beatles from Yellow Submarine, but it was very like claymation looking,
animated looking.
It was very like claymation animated looking, and they're very colorful, bright, and stuff like that. It was so different. Like on one side you have like these grotesque creatures of like all like that details of like skin and flesh and blood, and then you have like the cartoony look of the animated Beatles. So his range of figures was just very, very dynamic. And then we started seeing later on where he started to move away from not move away from the movies, but he started to branch out from just getting movie properties to now doing a lot of video games. So one of the earlier ones. Yeah. Now this wasn't my thing, but one of my friends used to be a very big Metal Gear Solid fan, which is a video game. It's just like a PlayStation video game where you play sort of like a secret agent spy guy character. Mm-hmm. And so he acquired the license to Metal Gear Solid and made a whole bunch of characters from that game. So now he has movies on one side, and not just horror movies. He has a whole bunch of, the Austin Power movies, things like that. Then he has, video games where he's breaking into. And then he has his own unique sort of like McFarlane, not even licensed, but his own creations, basically, where he has these very like horror and themed fairy tale creatures. It was one line which I loved. I'm definitely going back and trying to grab it myself. Is a set of Wizard of Oz characters, but again, very, very McFarlaneized. It's very horror based. It's grotesque creatures, very, very Halloweenish, definitely inspired. But they all look so like very gothic, very, very cool looking.
I think one of his most, I guess, at least familiar with lines that people might be very well familiar with lately is the Game of Thrones and the Walking Dead.
Yeah.
Those are very successful lines for him, I think.
Yeah. Those are definitely some of his newer acquisitions, and the Game of Thrones line looks really cool because accompanying that is he has like these dragon characters, like the dragon line, which is perfect. Yeah, exactly. And he had the dragons even before he got the Game of Thrones license, so he's a perfect fit for him. And just a few highlights where he also has, again, like I mentioned, the Akira line of characters, which look amazing. Like I'm trying not to be biased because I love Akira.
Didn't he do the Matrix?
Yeah.
Oh, I have. It's in pieces, but I still have that machine that they ride, that they're walking on.
Oh, right.
It is huge. And then the gigantic octopus. Yeah, it is incredible when you look at that thing. And it's all made out of plastic, and it looks like something that should be made out of metal. But that is one I would love to revive one day and put it back together and fix it, because it was just an amazing device that was made as a toy. Yeah. It's like ridiculous.
Yeah, his stuff is like, each piece is just like a work of art, really. Like you can really look at some of this stuff and say like, like how like a lot of times I'll have like when I set up a display, I'll have like one centerpiece figure. Like so many of McFarlane's are like centerpiece figures.
But that's the whole point. It's not so much an action figure. It's a little statue. It's a statue that is posable.
Yeah.
But it's the quality. It's just ridiculous how good it looks.
One of my favorite lines actually is from when I was growing up. I used to, and I still do. Admittedly, I love the book Where the Wild Things Are. It's one of my favorite childhood books. So when I saw that he had a whole line of where the wild things are, I had to go back and just grab as many as I can. So I got 2 pieces now, and I'm trying to go back and find the others. Because again, it's so bizarre. Some of the choices he gets in licensing, on one hand you have, again, these hellish, nightmarish creatures, and then you have this a book from my childhood that I had read to me at night.
He's all over the place.
Yeah, but
I think he, as early as like maybe 1 or 2 years ago, he had actually gotten Star Trek, the rights to Star Trek, and he was producing a few characters. I don't know if they pushed forward with any newer ones, but I know he had like Picard, I think.
Kirk,
and Kirk, and I was hoping they would go forward with that a little more, but I don't know where they're at.
And just as an aside, I think the licensing with Star Trek stuff is weird because they have a license with Mega Blocks, like the building blocks. But it seems like whatever they like put out, they'll put out a little bit and then just cut the line completely because Mega Blocks.
Well, that's the biggest problem.
Yeah, because Mega Blocks made the Enterprise set, and then they made I think they made like a Bird of Prey and a few of the little minifigures, but that's it. And we haven't heard anything since. So I don't know.
No, it's weird. And that's the biggest problem is that sometimes you get into these lines and before you know it, boom, they're over, and you're like, oh crap, that's it. So, you're definitely not going long term with some of these characters unless it's something that he really, really loves, like his Spawn character, something that he will just continue to hit.
And also we probably didn't talk about enough, but the sports line I think is definitely something that's always there every year after year. He always has the baseball, and it seems like basketball I think is probably the second biggest, but I'm assuming he's a baseball fan because the bread and butter of the sports stuff is always the baseball. It seems like it's always, and I really don't follow baseball that much. I'm more of a hockey guy, so I'll look at the hockey figures, but baseball seems to be the most prominent line of his figures.
The other thing that I remember listening to an interview with him lately, and I don't know if this is something he was hoping for a very long time ago, but now, because of the demise of Toys R Us, and KB is not around anymore, and KB used to be the place where I used to buy most of these, because I don't know, I think Toys R Us was a little shy of this type of toy back then. I think it was considered to be a little too adultish, not kiddie enough, especially with like movie maniacs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I think what's happened now is, because of the demise of these big toy stores, I think he's working more with trying to sell directly from himself, instead, avoiding the middleman and going straight to the source, which is something a lot of people, have been hoping that they could do.
Yeah, and that's such a McFarlane thing to do, right? I mean, that is definitely something. Which I'm to be honest, I'm surprised that wasn't something he intended from the beginning, was to just cut out, the toys. I can really see him, being one of those guys where he wants to just sell directly to you instead of having to go through a Toys R Us or a Walmart or something.
Well, the last news that I found, I hope it hasn't changed yet, is that both Jeremy Renner and Jamie Foxx are supposed to be working on this Spawn film. I assume Jamie Foxx is the lead. It's probably going
to be out, most likely.
So, yeah, that's interesting. It's very interesting, if they actually make it all the way to this
thing. You know what? And to go back to the movie for a second, as much as I didn't like the movie all that much, the Michael J. White, who played Al Simmons,
he's great.
He was actually really good in that movie. He was actually a really good.
Wasn't he also the voice for the animated one?
Was he? He could have been.
I think he was. I think they used his voice.
Well, what's funny is he in real life he is a comic book fan. He actually cameoed in
and he's like a martial artist and everything. Yeah. He's like he knows this stuff.
He cameoed in The Dark Knight. He was one of like the Joker's, I guess, like mob guys.
Yep.
Yeah, just some other highlights here. He also has, I think he got into this a bit later, was he started doing a lot of like musical artists. So there's a great one of Jimi Hendrix, a figure of Jimi Hendrix. I guess he's playing at Woodstock, and so he has so many different. His toys follow so many different areas. Like again, he's the music with like Kiss and Jimi Hendrix, and I think he did one of Janis Joplin. He has.
That's right. He does the music.
He has all his sports lines and everything.
Oh, I just checked. Keith David did the voice for Spawn and the animated one.
David. I'm not familiar with him.
If you look up his face, he's been in everything. He's been in Platoon. He's been. Let me see, what else has he been? I mean, I always get him confused with David Keith. Keith David and David Keith. I just go back and forth. He was in They Live. He's been in The Thing. Remember The Thing? It's Kurt Russell and Keith David are the last ones at the end.
Gotcha. Okay.
They Live. He's the other. He's not Roddy Piper. He's the other guy. Yeah, wow, that's right. I could picture his voice now. Yeah, he's got a really, really deep voice. Yeah, I mean, again, I would suggest, look up some of his interviews and just listen to him, because, he's a character into himself. I mean, forget that on one hand you have the products, and then on the other hand you have him. And there are people that hate him. They absolutely hate him.
Yeah,
because he's a tough guy.
I would never describe him as obnoxious, but he has a certain he's so again, like you said, rough around the edges, where he's not exactly the most charismatic person. Maybe that's not the right word, but he's gotten into a lot.
He's very opinionated.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like my way or the highway kind of guy.
Yeah, and he's gotten into a lot of legal trouble around around licensing and everything, because in the early days of Spawn, I guess he realized that he wasn't the best storyteller, so he wanted to focus on art. So in the early days of Spawn, he brought in a lot of other third-party writers to write the early issues of Spawn to get it off the ground and to sort of set the, I guess, lore of Spawn.
And so he still owes them money or something?
Yeah. So basically, what happened was one such writer was Neil Gaiman, where he was brought in, and Neil Gaiman created a character for him called Angela, and basically McFarlane, after he basically had his run with the character, McFarlane said, "Okay, that's great, thanks for doing it, but I want to use Angela now for myself, and keep all the profits." And Gaiman said, "Well, no, hold on there a second. But I create this character. I should get some of the rights to it." So there was just years and years of legal battle going back and forth between the two. And I believe I believe he actually lost. I think he actually had to pay him.
Wow.
Yeah, I think he actually had to pay Gaiman. And there was also another court case where same type of situation where he wanted to keep these properties for himself so he can create toys and figures from them and all the extras, but it just people who created it weren't really having it. So yeah, so he has his definite detractors. Like there's a lot of people out there who don't really like McFarlane. But you gotta give the guy respect. I mean, he sees things he doesn't like. It goes about how he thinks they should be run, and he goes out and does it. So,
and he seems to jump back and forth. In other words, he's not kind of stuck on retro stuff, old stuff. He goes from retro to brand new.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And everywhere in between. Because I'm looking at his website here, and like I said, Game of Thrones, Doom, Mortal Kombat, Harry Potter, Call of Duty, Labyrinth. Talk about something obscure.
Yes, right.
Stranger Things, something totally brand new. Some of the stuff I have no idea what Cuphead, I don't know what that is. Fortnite, I guess that's one of these kids like these days. Get off my lawn, get out of here. He's there. He knows how to do this stuff.
Yeah, and some of the things he markets it towards is you can tell he has an eye for what will stand out as a figure because you mentioned Cuphead. It's actually based on like this little 2D side-scrolling video game, but not to go off on a tangent, but the animation in this game is gorgeous. It's a 2D hand-drawn game, which is very not done anymore, and it's done in the style of like a very 1930s cartoon. It looks like one of those cartoons you would see in the beginning of a movie in the 1930s, where they'd have like maybe like a little cartoon animated thing in the beginning of the movie,
like a little short.
Yeah, it's done in that style, and it's gorgeous looking. And but he creates these figures based on it, and the figures come out looking great because he can tell he would look at something and say, okay, I can make a figure of this, and it can end up looking really, 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 really awesome. And hence we have the great choices he has. And yeah, you're right. He is a bunch of like anime stuff, which I don't really follow all that much.
But have you purchased like recent, like newer stuff?
No, I'm trying to catch up now. Because there's so much money I can throw at the.
But you're working on older stuff or new stuff?
Right now, I'm trying to catch up from the older stuff. I'll slowly be making my way up to the newer stuff as we move along.
With me, what I'm always still looking at that I completely passed up when it first came out because I was an idiot is The Thing. I'm still trying to get those original The Thing McFarlanes that I remember there were tons on the pegs back then, and they were gross. They were disgusting looking. They were really, really, but it's like, damn, I should have grabbed that.
Well, my thing was when a lot of stuff came out, I was getting like an allowance from my parents. I wanted it. Trust me, I wanted all this cool stuff. But I had no way to really I had to save up pennies basically to afford a lot of this stuff.
Oh yeah.
And so he also did a bunch of movies that were around the time when this started, like The Crow. I remember he did a line on The Crow and everything.
Edward Scissorhands.
Yeah.
He did. I think he also did a RoboCop, but once again, he couldn't get the rights to the first one, so he got RoboCop 2, which it's painted like slightly bluish, so it's like, all right, fine, you can get away with that.
Yeah, a lot of games. I remember I was playing. My friends and I, after school each day, we'd come home and play video games. So we used to play Soul Calibur 2, which is a fighting game. And the thing of Soul Calibur 2 is it came out in 3 different consoles. It came out in GameCube, it came out on PlayStation 2 and Xbox. And each console had a specific unique character, exclusive character. And the exclusive character for Xbox was a McFarlane creation. McFarlane actually created a character specifically for the game, and you'd be able to play as Spawn in the game as a fighting character. Yeah, so and of course, McFarlane jumped on that bandwagon and said, okay, well I'll get the license to Soul Calibur, and thus we have an entire Soul Calibur line of toys. So he's excellent at picking and choosing what lines of products to go in mind, basically.
I'm going to mention a few other ones. He did a whole bunch of Alien and Aliens, I think, type of character. Again, part of the movie Maniacs.
Yeah.
He did the Lord of Darkness from Legend. the Tim Curry,
the big red
devil thing.
Yep.
It is fantastic. It's a gorgeous looking figure. And I remember some of these actually would come with like a little plastic marquee poster that you could pose with the figure. That was like a little stand for him to stand and a little poster that would stand like behind the figure. Again, the accessories, all the extras that they would throw into this package, you've never seen this before. It was completely, again, you're getting your money's worth. You're paying more, but you're legitimately getting more stuff.
Yeah, something I noticed with his figures is there's something about where he does and how he sculpts fabric and cloth, because it looks so stunning. And for some of the figures, like instead of having it as a flat shirt that's someone's shirt on a figure, he would have wrinkles, and like as the arm raises, he would have like the stress lines in the fabric.
Right, and he would use rubber also to simulate fabric. Yeah, and that the rubber would give it would have play. You could stretch the arm, and the rubber would kind of move with it too. They would stretch. Normally if it was plastic, you would crack it, but no. It was a very, like I said, very innovative, groundbreaking company that to this day, to me, it's like, yep, that's a McFarlane, that kind of thing.
You can instantly tell, like because there are a lot of companies and makers now that are sort of trying to emulate this style, especially as it came out, but for a certain time, there was where you can instantly spot McFarlane just from looking at the level of detail and the poses and everything. It's really, really stunning stuff.
And again, stuff is going to continue coming out. I'm sure he's going to be continuing to diversifying into whatever happens to be popular. And I just really hope that this movie can get made eventually, and it'll be a hit, because it's like this is just, I don't know if he can go for a third time around. I think the second time, but that might be it. I don't know how much you can do that.
Yeah, it turned to something like Terminator. Like okay, no, this is now another reboot. You can't keep doing this. But I will say this: I think if it does come out, I think in this post-Joker world now, I would say that having an anti-villain like that may be a good time to bring something like Spawn out, because I can see now people riding the high of how Joker was such a nuanced character in that movie. If he can sort of position the character of Al Simmons into being something like that, I think that would really work.
And I would even give credit to not only Joker, but I would also give credit to Deadpool. Not so much because it's funny, but because it's different and not serious, but more adultish.
Right.
And that's the difference. When it comes to this sort of thing, I'm pretty sure those are the two things that I would imagine that a studio that's willing to drop serious bucks, those are the two things they're looking at and saying, hey, maybe we can do something like that. And hopefully they'll go there.
Yeah, hopefully. And hopefully he has a bit more of a hand in how the direction he wants to take it. Because, say what you will about McFarlane and his contentious, attitude at times. He has a very set vision of what he wants and how he wants to control things. And for the most part, it comes out usually pretty well. I mean, as someone who reads the comics, Spawn is, and it's funny, it is actually coming at a good time, because Spawn actually just reached issue 300 back in September. I followed it off and on. I can't say that I've been, 100%, Spawn fan through and through the years, but a lot of his storylines are big misses. They come off as very repetitive, very sort of generic, but the design and the overall concept of Spawn, I think, was groundbreaking, and I think it still holds its own to be one of the coolest looking comic book characters, ever made.
Definitely. All right, well, I hope everybody enjoyed today's episode. We discussed McFarlane action figures, that toy line in general that was very popular probably around the time that I was finishing college and starting to work, at my first job, the early to mid 90s. Both Steve and I kind of jumped into the McFarlane bandwagon at different times, because we're different ages, and how all that stuff kind of progressed and how innovative they were, for the time. Today, it's a little different. There are many, many, many more competitors. The major store distributors are not around anymore. The Toys R Us's don't exist. The KBs don't exist. So it's a different marketplace altogether. Different lines now include the retro lines, all those retro kind of action figure lines that are now competing for those same dollars as your typical, Mattel or Hasbro that are still going somewhat strong. Alongside with McFarlane and all the McFarlane looking competitors, the copycats that developed along, the years. Aside from even Miko nowadays is kind of trying to find a niche back into the market. So it's really, really interesting how the very innovative McFarlane line now seems to be competing with even more different kinds of toys, specifically action figures. But the downside is that there's just not as many distributors around anymore. So as we mentioned during the show, yes, a lot of these companies like McFarlane, they try to go the route of the self-distributing line. They try to sell directly from them. Now, because there's just no stores other than Target and Walmart, I don't get to really see too many McFarlane items. Most of it seems to be online as far as I can tell. Or I guess if you go to a convention, you might be able to spot a couple of them here or there. But who knows what new licenses they're going to be getting. It's all about the license. If all of a sudden they get their hands on a very popular license, when Walking Dead was at its peak, they scored really well with those, and same thing with Game of Thrones. But now I'm curious to see what's going to be the next great license that they can get their hands on and all of a sudden bring their company to the forefront again. I don't know if they really have it in them to come up with a new innovative gimmick, if you will. The fact that they brought their figures out at a specific time where those kind of figures just didn't exist was, trailblazing, in terms of something we hadn't seen before. But nowadays, I don't know what is the next greatest thing. With reaction figures, just the idea of going back to something vintagey, even though it's technically not innovative, it's, nostalgia and retro vintage. That's one thing that all of a sudden a couple of companies are trying to copy. But I don't see right now, where can McFarlane go next? What can they innovate that we haven't seen before, other than their traditional super, articulated, super detailed, super posable style, which is what got them to the forefront of the industry at that time. So until that happens, we'll keep looking. I'll keep looking, and if they put out something really innovative or really good, I'm there. All right, so thank you again, everybody. Thank you, Steve. Thank you guys for listening, and we will see you here soon at GeekFest Rants. Bye-bye, everybody.
What would you do if at the moment of death, a voice from the darkness offered you the chance to live again? Have your answer? There's no time to think about it. Your heartbeat away from flatlining. Quick, what's the answer? I'm Todd McFarlane, and I created Spawn. I hope you'll consider the question I've just posed, because a man named Al Simmons didn't. When the question got popped on him, he signed like some stupid rookie in blood. See, Al had qualities he didn't even know he had, a special kind of wiring that Malbosia the devil looks for. And when he said yes to that voice, he signed on for a whole lot more than he ever bargained for. So before you find yourself in a similar situation, and a voice calls to you in the darkness, think of Al. Or as you may see, you'll have all eternity to think about your mistake too. And now Spawn, so turn off your lights.
If you would like to subscribe to our show, send us messages, or see video links to some of the topics we talked about today, please visit our homepage at geekfestrants.com or our YouTube channel, Facebook page, or iTunes at GeekFest Rants.
I don't know what we're yelling about!
GeekFest Rants is produced by Carlos Perone, copyright 2020.
This broadcast is part of the IC Robots Radio Network. Visit icrobots.com for this and many other nerd/nostalgia related podcasts. You won't be sorry for long.